away.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Translate.
The ambassador.
Is there still?
From soft to loud. We all have our different strengths.
Very well.
Yes, the same.
Calm responsibilities of this team. I'll call.
Ну, в общем-то, нажмешь в аэропорт. Там
Надо стор распечатать себе бумажку, она мне
Да.
на почту присылали.
This is we're getting closer to mixing. There we are.
Мы тут обсуждаем разные.
Well, it's 6 now, actually.
Okay.
Okay, shall we start? Is everyone prepared?
Is there going to be a quiz at the end?
Would the concentration be better if I say yes? Будете говорить, как или не будете? Скажите, что-то.
All right. So I'm very happy to have this spontaneous event happening at our apartment on the 26th of October. We started our festival exactly 10 days ago on the 16th. And our last event will be tomorrow, and we will be at your concert, Alexander, at 6 o'clock tomorrow, Boston University School for the Arts. There will be a concert, French horns from Russia and America. And we had French horns from Russia and America for 3 years in a row. We had American BU students going to Russia. We had Moscow Conservatory student Alexander coming here. And please, if you have time tomorrow at 6 o'clock, come to the concert at the BU School of Music. Green Line B train stop is BU West. Thank you. I don't know where West is. All right, BU West. Okay, and today we have this very interesting. Well, I say interesting because I saw it. That's why I'm saying it's very interesting. Glimpses of History of Musical Notation by Kyriell. Kyriell?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Kyriell?
Yes, Kyriell Palaeologue.
No, I know that. They can read it. So, not to mention that I received emails from him signed by 3 different names. Okay.
You shouldn't mention that.
Yes. Okay. So please tell us these fascinating things. But I would like to apologize if somebody will call, not on the phone. The phones are off. But if somebody comes, we will have to open the door.
Yes, we
Okay,
will pretend that we do not. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Kyriell.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming today and expressing your interest in the musical topic I'm going to talk about today. And it's going to be the history of musical notation. The goal today will be to outline the history of musical notation, how it mutated, evolved, and changed during the time. And let us start with a definition of musical notation, just to be on the same page. According to Harvard Dictionary of Music, musical notation is the method or methods used for writing down music. But this is very important to understand that there are 2 basic components of music that are very important to write down in order to play the music from the notation, which is the pitch and duration. Because if we change pitch, like for example in this little tune, Happy Birthday to You, but the duration of each note is the same, then we will have a different melody. Like for example, Happy birthday to you, we change pitch, Happy birthday to you, so it's a different one, and it's the same with the duration. And it's not always the case that notation reflects both these things. And it's going to be, let us look at the oldest examples of the musical notation. The oldest sufficiently surviving musical notation dates back to the 2nd millennium, and it's a cuneiform clay tablet that contains, presumably, a hymn to the Hurrian goddess Nikal, goddess of orchards and fruitfulness. Let us look at it a little closer. So the researchers tell us that it consists of the text of the hymn in the top part, and under these two lines there is presumably the notation of the hymn, but it's so ambiguous, and that all the researchers, they do not agree with one another on almost anything at all. So there is an argument about the melody itself, about how many parts there are in the hymn, and whether it is sung or it is played on a lyre, and so on. But so one of the researchers, Marcel Duchamp-Guemin, she writes that the 4 lines on the upper part of the tablet are here in hymn, the meaning of which escapes us almost entirely because of our imperfect knowledge of the language. We can recognize in a few words the goddess Nikal, wife of the moon god, a gift, a heart, fathers. So you can imagine how difficult it is to decipher the notation if we know so little about the language at all. And this is the interpretation by the same researcher, Marcel Duchamp-Guemin, and that she published in her monograph. So the words are almost unknown, the meaning of them. So though the vowels are there and we can sing them, not knowing what they mean. And the melody is presumably this, and let us just try to listen to it. So
what the language is it?
The language is Hurrian.
Which? Oh.
It doesn't say it here. Hurrian language. It's a folk in the Bronze Age, Near East. So it's like it's very old. So it dates back to the 2nd millennium before Christ.
Only Russian? I'm confused.
Huritsky. Yeah, something
Babylonian, something like that.
Yes.
And were they the sounds that they were singing, not just the pitch and the length, but the sounds they were singing, attempting to simulate that language as it would have been sung?
So we know the vowels, how they sound, what they sound like, but we do not really know what they mean.
Are they sure that the music? Are they sure that it is musical notation though?
Yes, they are sure, because there is a description of the tuning of a lyre. So they tell you how to tune the lyre, and from this you kind of extract, and then they prescribe how to use it for this particular hymn. So, and this is what I was going to tell about this type of notation. It's more descriptive. It's like a description of what you should play with words. It's not a separate type of, it's not a system of symbols that is meant for music only. And the next oldest completely surviving piece of music notated is going to be in the ancient Greece. It was found in the ancient city of Tralles in the 19th century. And it's a stele that was found in a tomb of a woman. Presumably it was that woman who was called Euterpe, and she was a wife of the Sacalus who put that tombstone on her grave. So let us just look at this a little closer. Let us unfold it. Here is the description of what you see before you kind of, I'm a tombstone, an image Seculus placed me here as a long-lasting sign of deathless remembrance. Here we see one line that says Seculus to, presumably Euterpe. We don't know, maybe it's Seculus from somewhere, because there is no, the word doesn't end. There are some letters lacking. We are missing some letters. But the hymn itself, or the epitaph rather, says, while you live, shine, sorrow not. Life is short and it will end. It's very life-affirming. But the interesting part for us is these little signs on top of the text in ancient Greek, which is the notation. So it is called alphabetic notation, because each letter is assigned to a certain pitch. And this, let us just see it in a little better way. So we see the letters on top, and these little signs on top of the letters of the notation are meant to designate the duration of each of the notes. And so during the presentation, during the talk, I will try to compare the notation that we have today and the notation that we are discussing at the moment. And this one, for example, the alphabetic notation, it is very different from the modern notation in one way, that modern notation uses the vertical dimension. Let us look at this. So this is the same melody in two notations, the modern and the ancient Greek notation. And here in the modern notation, you can see the higher the note head is on the stave, the higher the pitch is. Whereas if you do not know the meaning of certain letter in the ancient Greek notation, you're kind of lost. You do not know, is it higher or is it lower than on all the others. So in this sense, modern notation is more advanced, more comfortable to read. And let us listen to. Yes.
So do the letters, the capital letters,
yes,
in Latin script over the Greek script?
It's not Latin.
But the sort of the letters over the Greek script.
No. Yes.
The big ones, the capital ones.
Yes.
Do they refer to pitch and then the lines over them the length?
To the
time.
Yes, to the time direction.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct. So this is the ancient Greek notation. Let me find the notes. Let us listen to it. Oh. Okay, I'm sorry. So then she's going to sing, and it's going to be accompanied. Don't listen to the accompaniment, because there is no accompaniment in the notation. This is not in the notation. So this is just interpretation, So, what is it? Yes, it's like, they just added it because it was beautiful for them. And so this is another example of a music that is monotonic, because the previous one had only one part, one musical part, which means it can be performed by just one voice. There's music that cannot be performed by just one voice. But this is not the case when we can use, for example, that probably cuneiform notation, we don't know, I won't say anything about it, or the ancient Greek notation, because it's only monophonic. and it doesn't have rhythm, so it doesn't show the rhythm. But let us start with the roots of the musical notation that we have today. It might be a surprise, it was a surprise for me when I learned that our musical notation actually originates in the diacritics of the ancient Greek language. Not in the musical notation of the Greek language, of ancient Greece, as we saw it just now, but in diacritics, because the Latin language and the ancient Greek language, they had tones. And each of them was designated to a diacritical symbol, which was put on top of the letter. So one of them is acute, as we call it today in English, or oxia, and the other one is grave. The acute literally means we do not really know how they sounded, but we know that they existed. And acute is a higher tone. So we do not have these tones in English or in Russian or in any other, or even in Greek today. But it's higher tone, whereas grave is lower tone. And so this is the root of the notation that we have today, and we'll see how it evolved. And the first step from these diacritical signs was the aphonetic notation, which is, so this is, for example, late 10th century Greek Bible. So there is Greek text, and there are these acutes and graves on top of the text that are meant to remind someone who is reading the Bible whether the voice should go up or down. This is about it. So this is the first type. It's very simple, but at the same time, it doesn't really give you an idea of what the melody should be. It's just for you to remember that now it goes up and then it goes down at some point, like for example this or that. And the next step, we see it evolves from acute and grave into neumes. And so the word neum comes from Greek, either pneuma, which is breath, or pneuma, which is sign. There is no unity on this point too. But acute becomes virga, which is a Latin word already, meaning rod. And grave becomes punctum, which means point. And virga means higher sound, whereas punctum means lower sound. So it's very, very confusing when you try to read it. As a matter of fact, you cannot read neumes. You can only be reminded by the neumes. And so these two basic symbols, they are combined and construct ligatures. For example, punctum and virga becomes pes, and this is this neume. Virga in punctum becomes clivis, which makes this neume like this, and so on and so forth. This is punctum and virga and punctum. This is virga and punctum and virga. So many ligatures. All of them you have to remember.
So the top line is essentially just dots, right? The virga is
no.
higher.
So it's just to show for us that one is lower, the next one is yeah.
Yeah, they're just dots.
It's not a notation. This is for us to see, just to understand what each neume means. So the actual notation that used to exist is this. So those are the compound neumes, the ligatures. And so you had to know all the ligatures in order to understand them. And you also had to know all the hymns in order to be helped by neumes when you look at them. Because if you look at the neumes, you do not know how many notes there is in one neume. So this could mean 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3. Oh, no, I'm sorry. 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, 4, for example. Or it can be 5. So you should know the hymn before you start singing. And this is what it looked like. So there is the text. And in this instance, it's a psalm, Jubilate Deo. And these squiggles on top are the neumes. Let us listen to it and just pay a closer attention to this part. As you can see, there is no text. So he sings Jubilate Deo Universa Terra, Jubila, and then he sings this forever. And this is an especially interesting part, because if you do not know what it is, you just lost, okay, what the hymn is. Sorry. Get the idea. So if you do not know the neumes, you will not be able. If you do not know the hymn, you will not be able to decipher neumes. And some of the notations that some of the pieces of music that were notated in neumes, they are lost because they weren't written in a more precise notation. We cannot decipher them. So there were many people who tried to somehow make the system of notation better, because neumes were widely spread around the medieval Europe. And one of them...
May I just ask?
Yes.
You talked about the origin in Greek.
Yes.
Is it sort of an evolution from Greek?
Yes.
Were these neumes used in both the eastern and the western side of the...
No. Well, actually, yes. They were used in Russia, so it's like...
Sort of pan-Christian world at this point.
Yes. Well, actually, even Judaism had its kind of neumes, but they didn't call it neumes. But the principle was the same. It's like to remind you whether it's up or down and so on. And one of the people to improve, we're going to skip this, the pneumatic notation was this guy called William of Dijon. What he decided to do was to put these letters, just like in the ancient Greek notation, letters right next to neumes to give the idea of what the notes are. And this is what it looked like. You see, there are neumes, there is the text, and there are the little letters. Each of them designates a certain pitch, which is very helpful, but there is no rhythm. Unfortunately, this type of notation it only appears in a couple of manuscripts, as opposed to just normal neumes. And, okay, so this is one of the stages. And I don't think we should listen to this one. The next, one of the improvers of the pneumatic notation was Adhemar de Chabannes. Here he is. And he was from France, as you can probably see, and he came with a great idea. I told you about the vertical dimension. He decided to put the neumes, to use the vertical dimension. So the neumes that designate higher tones, they put higher, a little bit higher, and the neumes that are lower, they designate a lower pitch. But it wasn't precise at all again, and there was no rhythm. So this is another attempt to improve it. And this is a very interesting thing, and it's of the 9th century. unknown person. There are several like ideas what if this on this created this Musica Enchiriadis, which contained this very interesting type of notation that actually had lines, and we can see it's almost a stave that we have today. But what it is actually, so these little symbols designate pitch, certain pitch, so it's like a scale, and between are placed the vowels of the words. It was very inconvenient. This is a very moderate one, because sometimes there would be 12 lines. It was like huge, and the monks and singers didn't like it at all. But this is the first attempt to use the stave of sorts, and to use the clefs of sorts, because these signs would evolve in clefs to give you an idea of what the pitch of each line is. Yes?
So essentially the singer is supposed to read along
Yes.
the line,
Yes.
up and down.
Up and down. They were annoyed.
And that's a century and a half earlier than what you've been showing us.
Yes, so it's like I'm just jumping around 9th to 11th century. They were coming up with all these ideas.
Different approaches.
Yes, different approaches on the same idea of neumes. Okay, let's listen to this one. And here is, another very important point about this is that it isn't a monophonic melody, because it has two parts. You see, one is below.
That's what the second one is.
Yes, and this, and the one is upper part. And that's why in the modern notation we can see two lines of notes. And okay. This part is not here. So but it's very beautiful. So what we see here in this example, that it was very important. The idea of vertical dimension was very important for many part music, more than one part, because otherwise it's useless. Because and here we do not see any rhythm again. To give you an idea how they would figure out what kind of rhythm they should sing, they just knew it, and it was on the basis of the the rhythm of the speech was the basis of the rhythm of the singing. And here we go. This is a very famous guy. He is believed to create the prototype of the modern notation, Guido from Arezzo. But really, he is believed to create the stave. But we saw that there was kind of stave in the 9th century. So another thing, so he was still trying to simplify it, and he simplified the musical notation, and he standardized the amount of lines in the stave. So he decided that should be 4. He also introduced the colors of the lines, but they then weren't used very widely. And he essentially created the system that Roman Catholic Church is now using. The only thing he didn't create was the square shapes of the neumes. So we see that they turn into these lines, squiggles, to symbols with square head, almost like notes today. And here we go. This is the this is another very important thing about him. He created the names of the notes that we use today. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si. This is essentially, yes, but you cannot see ut, do here because it's ut, and it's the original form of this names for solmization, it is called. And this is a hymn, as you can see, and each phrase of it starts with a note that is one step higher. So ut, then re, then mi, then fa, then sol, and then la. So Sancte Johannes isn't higher, but they decided to just use S and I. So the question about we can listen.
The key of F, yeah?
What is it?
Key.
Yes, this is the key of F. So we the clef, right? Is it? Yes. Which is, you can see, this is kind of remind you of the letter F, and it actually used to be F, but it turned into this interesting symbol only for
Do
music.
you know why it's not do?
Oh, I'm going to tell you now. So, so let us just listen to it and try to hear the ut and so on. Here we go. He introduced this system and it was adopted widely. But then the guy who was called Giovanni Battista Doni in the 17th century, as you can see, so until the 17th century it was ut everywhere. And he said, well, it's not very convenient to sing ut because it's a closed vowel. All the others are open. And he suggested to use the syllable do. And he wouldn't argue that it's because his last name starts with do. No, he would say that do is the first syllable of the word dominus. Yes, domine, which means the Lord in Latin, and he is the root of everything, including music. And this is the first note. So Giovanni Battista Doni. And let us skip him. So, as we remember, there was no rhythm in the notation that was proposed by D'Arezzo, by Guido d'Arezzo. And the first attempt to write down rhythm in the Middle Ages, let's say, was made when they saw that it was impossible to write down music consisting of several parts. For example, this is four-part music, with the system that we have with neumes or with Guido d'Arezzo's system of notation, and they, it's going to be. It was a very complex system of notation because it was based on the poetical rhythms of the ancient Greek again. So and so it was. Yeah, let me just see what's next. Right. So the poetical rhythm like dactyl, anapest, and so on. If you should be all more or less familiar with them, right? Like some of them consist of 3, some of them consist of 2, and 1. So they consist of feet, and each foot is either long or short. So in this system of notation, it was also only long or short notes. So no others. There could be nothing else. And so, and we can see only 2 notes, as it were. Longa and brevis, long and short. But these that you can see on the screen is a little too ideal because they were almost never used in this shape. They were also being put together and create ligatures. All of them you have to know, and all of them would mean some kind of rhythm. And here we go. So you just have to learn them. Brevis longa, and this was quite a work to learn all of them. But on the other hand, despite the complexity of the notational system, we could actually see the rhythm, the rhythmic organization of the piece of music, and this is a breakthrough. Let us listen to it.
So just to make sure I haven't lost the plot.
Yes.
What Guido?
Yes.
What Guido did was solve the problem of pitch.
Yes.
So he solved the problem of pitch, and now we're working on the problem of rhythm.
Of rhythm.
Length. So
Yes.
and
So
sort of it looks like
pitch
sort of
is
the world adopted his idea of the stave or something.
of the
approximating
stave.
it to
Yes.
this.
He kind of standardized the number of lines, and he put the neumes on the stave, and then they evolved into this square neumes, as they were called. But square neumes didn't have rhythm in them.
Mhm.
But then the French, what's it called, the Notre Dame School of Polyphony, they decided to introduce rhythm in that, and they created.
The long and short.
Yeah. Yes. What is it?
Yeah,
The long
the
and short.
and the short and the variations of squiggles. That you
Yes. So in each ligature again would mean a certain rhythm, and let us listen to this. Peretin is one of the creators of this book that contained this teaching of this notational system that is called modal system, because it was based on the modes of the Greek poetry. Here we go. Going to start. Okay, so now we have rhythm, at least in some form, written down, even though in a very difficult form. And we have pitch written down. The difference from the modern notation, well, you can see that the shape of the heads is square, not oval, and so on. But the quantity of the lines is 5 already. There is no idea of separate note, separate symbol for each note. So they mean several notes. One ligature can mean several notes, and it's not a separate symbol. The next step, and the last step before we arrive to the modern notation, is mensural notation, which is even more complex because it has many more time values of the notes. So not only longa and brevis, but also semibrevis, and minima and semi-minima, and fusa and semifusa. So they were insatiable, they were adding them one after another. And so, as you can see, they already start using these tails, like in the modern musical notation, and notes that are not, the heads of which are not filled in. And normally, the ones that are not filled in, they mean the longer sounds, and ones that are filled in, they mean the shorter sounds. And the more tails you have, the shorter the sound is, just like in the today's notation. And the only complexity was that they were still using this modal system of rhythm. So each particular piece of music would contain a description saying how many brevi there is in one longa. It could be 3, or could be 1, or could be 2. How many semi-brevi there is in one brevi. So semi-brevi doesn't mean there is only 2, even though semi is half, yes. It could be 3, and so on, in one piece of music. Whereas, where is the... Okay. Yes, so let us skip this and see at what it is now, today. A whole note, as we have it today, is divided into halves. And this one is divided, and half divided into quarters, and quarter divided into eighths, and so on. So there is no like triple division of a note, time value. And this complexity, yes, you see, and they had all these fancy names, so the how many brevi there is in one longa would be called modus, and it could be perfect and imperfect. So imperfect is 2, and perfect is 3, and tempus is the division of the brevis, and there is a separate name for the division of semi-brevis. So they are creating all these fancy words, and it was very confusing. And so to somehow give the idea of what the rhythmic organization of this particular piece of music is, the Bishop of Pau in France, Philippe de Vitry, he created these signs that would tell you how many brevi there is in one, longa, and so on. And so, as you can see, tempus perfectum prolatio major. And these are the prototypes of what we now call time signature. And this is modern notation as we have it today. We can see the vertical organization, we can see the clefs that evolved. This is the G clef, it evolved from the letter G. And this one has evolved from the letter F. So literally, and they designate the pitches F and G. And we have this organization of the time values, which is not filled in without a the tail. Is the longest one, it's the whole note, it's the biggest one normally used in modern musical notation. Half of it has a tail, like this one, it's not filled in. Half of this one is the quarter, it's filled in, it has a tail, and then this one is half of quarter, which is eighth, it has this little more longer tail, and so on. We have standard amount of lines in the notation. And the other very interesting thing is that there is measures. So it's a very recent invention. Music wasn't divided into equally sized, in terms of time, parts, which are measures. Does it make sense? So that each measure has to be equally, has to have equal length in time. They didn't have it before. It was an invention of the 17th century when they started to put the measure lines. And this is about it. And the note shapes acquired this oval form. And this is vaguely how it was evolving And if you have questions, I would love to answer them, because I think I made it in 45 minutes, and I thought that it would be something like an hour. Maybe I was very, very quick in my explanation. And so let us just listen to this. This is, by the way, Prelude from Bach's Partita, B-dur, and which means B flat major. This is more European, and so there is still no. It's okay. It's not unified with America and Russia, for example, in Germany. There you go. Thank you very much. Any questions? Yes.
So going back one step before we've sort of reached modern notation, you mentioned that we don't have measures yet.
No. We have them now, but they didn't have them then.
Yes. So the question is, and this, I'm not terribly musically informed, but you mentioned that you have sort of the longa and the brevis.
Yes.
From this, each musician can denote how much time each of these notes is supposed to take by referencing back.
Yes.
Correct? So they say brevis is, 3 or 2.
Or 2, yes.
So doesn't that require some standardization of the longa, or whatever the largest note is?
Yes.
So that there is some sort of general understanding? And then if you don't have measures, how is this done?
So first of all, it was done so that it wasn't just divided into any equal parts. It was just flowing freely, as it were. So there were no phrases, and the meter was irregular. So it was just flowing musical text, as it were, because now we have that music that is very strictly divided, especially in the romantic music. It's very strictly divided into these measures. And the church music, which is based on the text, the text and prose doesn't have this division if it isn't poetic text.
You follow the text.
Yes, you follow.
Breathe where the text ends.
Yes, you breathe where the word ends, and your measure, as it were, ends where the words end, where the phrase naturally ends.
So to clarify, someone could play it at any pace they want, insofar as it fits with the text and that the internal referencing is consistent. but there wouldn't be a sort of standard understanding.
Oh, you mean like standard, like
I think
absolute?
you're talking about tempo, it's sort of
Yes.
how quickly or slowly it's sung or played.
Yes.
And I think that's a different
Well,
question.
there is no absolute
measuring
value.
has.
There is no
I-
absolute time value of each note,
Oh, I see.
even in today's notation. It's all relative. So the half is twice as long as the
quarter.
yes, the quarter. Thank you. And
That's my musical peak, by the way. It's all down to
and it depends on the tempo, how fast they're all going to be. So there is no absolute time value of a note. So yes, so it's all relative.
nor has there ever been. So
That's why you can hear someone complaining in someone's interpretation. He's playing it too slow, or that one is playing it too fast. If there was an absolute time value of the note,
Today we put the tempo on the after the class, the 4x4,
Right,
4x16.
yes.
that's the
That's
time
not-
signature.
not-
That's not the tempo.
No, the tempo is how fast the music
Yes.
is going. But
But what about the metronome?
the what?
The metronome.
The metronome, yes. Well, there is such thing as metronome. So there. Let's look at this. This one doesn't have the tempo designation, unfortunately. But sometimes you can see here andante and so on and so forth. And there are standard, vague, absolute time values for each tempo, but they are not strict. You cannot tell that it's precisely quarter a second this note lasts. It can be a little bit longer, so it depends on your interpretation. Sometimes, though, there can be this sign, like this note equals 50, for example. That would mean that 1 minute, is it true, would contain 50 notes of this shape, as it were. So that would be
That anchors the whole piece. Yeah.
yes, or the part of the
Or
piece.
the part of it.
It doesn't happen a lot. It happens in a very determined music of the modern composers. Like I want it to be precisely 1 second and 45, 0.45. Yeah.
So going back to the evolution of musical notation, as you did the study
Yes.
of the question, did you come to a view as to whether changes and developments in musical notation led the developments of music? In other words, made more complex musical creations possible, or whether they tended to act more as a response to sort of an impulse to have those more complicated musical forms.
The latter. So they would first come up with a desire to create a more complex music and then create a notation for it, like this Notre Dame school of polyphony. Because what they were doing, they were composing organi, singular organum, which means that they take a melody of a Gregorian chant and add some parts to it. So they just wanted to make it more, well, they were working in France, they wanted to make it more, sophisticated and florid, yes, more beautiful. And this is what they were doing. They were adding, so there was the standard Gregorian chant that wasn't meant to be changed in any way. But they didn't change it, they just added some more. And this is what organum is. And this is how they came up with this system of multi-part notation. Where, yes, the more complex notation appears together with the more complex music. So this is as a response, rather.
And do you see that tendency, sort of the more complex notation, sort of appearing after the more complex music appears? Do you see that going on in the modern world, where we have all sorts of strange sounds produced in even the sort of classical music world that we didn't used to have? I don't know if we have sort of continued strange evolutions of squiggles
Well, you see, this system is so it doesn't change very dramatically somehow. There are attempts. For example, there is such thing as what is it, a quarter tone music.
Yeah.
So and they would require more note heads, as it were, because so we have a system of sounds today that is natural for our ear, consisting of semitones. And they wanted to create a system of more tones. So they would divide each semitone into 2 quarter tones. And it sounds really, if you listen to quarter tone music, it sounds somewhat like an untuned piano, because the difference in the tune is so little for the ear that you cannot really understand what you have to get used to this kind of music. And of course it would require new additions to the modern music of notation to somehow, because this is not a standard situation when you need to play quarter tones for the system notation we have here. Bach wouldn't think of that because it would, well, my personal commentaries I will. So there is, yes, but it doesn't really exist as a vast, core quantity of music, quarter tone music. There were many attempts in the modern time, in the 20th century, like, for example, Schoenberg. He wanted to create visually a system of musical notation that would visually show that all the sounds are equal, that they are not derivatives of other sounds. Whereas today, today we have this situation precisely, that some of the sounds are amended in some way. And for example, these symbols,
Sharps and flats.
yes, sharps and flats. So for example, you have F, but you have F flat, which is a semitone higher, and you have F sharp, which is a semitone higher, and F flat, which is a semitone lower. And he wanted to get rid of all these flats and sharps. His notation is absolutely equal. Like all the sounds are equal, but he didn't really use it either.
He sounds like many idealists.
Yes. Yes, Sandra?
Well, it's sort of not a question, but when you were framing that, I was thinking that it seems both music and language have this odd, if you will, that there seems to be some sort of function that people have or can express into which these tools grow. So language sort of develops from some sort of primordial state into a point where it's become sort of the perfect and sufficient tool for what it is that humans need to do.
Right.
And then you have people who try to push it past that, but it doesn't sort of naturally.
Yes,
And from what you're saying, music has done something similar.
Yes,
So
I would say that, yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Because
because
the idea that it's solved the problems it needs to solve.
It's become sort of the right and necessary. Yeah.
yes, it's more or less stable. It's
Uh-huh.
convenient, and it's widely known, and the amendments to it are not very easily accepted, because this is the most convenient system of notation that the humanity came up with. So, yes.
So you don't think that there's sort of a new horizon to this? You think this is pretty representative of what we need for the
No, I
system?
think, well, it's very difficult to answer. One of the points of view would be that the abilities of a human ear are limited. They are not, like, if you can try to divide semitones into not just quarter tones but eighth tones, it wouldn't make probably any sense. Maybe in hundreds and hundreds of years when we evolve in a certain way and we have such
Hopefully not.
and have this new music that is the nature of which is completely different, then maybe it would be something like it would be yes, people would come up with a new system of notation, but I don't see a new horizon today.
Yeah, but I think the interesting thing is that as you were showing us how we came to the notes.
Yes, yes.
And we started with some lines. Now, in
Well-
musical notation, we can see some signs like this.
That's true. Yes.
Yes. And even though they appear on the divided score, which has 5, 5, 5, 5 for every instrument, starting from piccolo flute and going to the double bass, you will have that. How will you play it? We are not harpists. Oh,
It's George Ligeti Gamble concept
Yes.
of French horn,
That,
nature of French horn.
that coming from French hornists. Yes, French hornists.
So how do you play that?
I'm
Yes.
looking for those squiggles that you're talking about. I see lots of things that look normal, or at least to my eye. What are
You
you?
can
You can come closer on there and just look at this. Alexander found something very interesting.
Will you point to me what?
Yes, these look like just regular words.
What is it? It's a Gamble concept. George Ligeti.
Ligeti,
Yeah.
George Ligeti.
Isn't he just doing sort of play like that?
We cannot hear it, right, Alexander?
Oh.
We cannot hear it, or can we?
I can.
Okay, let's hear that.
Oh.
Ты можешь
Можно
это прозвучать?
Вы прозвучало, как
Да нет,
Нет, это не. Unfortunately,
Сейчас
we
мы
can't.
уже 7
But
часов.
next time
Yeah,
we
but
say
it's sort of,
Ligeti,
there are just sort of people who go, well,
Yes,
they
they
can
do.
figure out what I mean. with
Maybe
this.
we
Some,
have,
some, I think that was Cage who used the
4 minutes 33 seconds.
yes, well, no notes at all.
No, that.
Yes, and maybe it wasn't Cage, but there was a composer who employed the Palaeologue approach. You know this. So here is my piece of music. You play it however you like.
It was composed by chimpanzees.
What is that? That I don't know. That's
Hmm?
chimpanzee.
What?
What
Well, I
is
said it was composed by chimpanzees.
You can become a
become a
composer.
composer.
You should think about compositorial
Oh.
career. I think.
Oh,
I'm working on a number of directions in the contemporary art world.
Yes, that's very promising.
oh. Well, thank you so much,
Thank
Kyriell.
you.
And next time you will prepare something. I can see that every year you come up with a very interesting topic.
Thank
And
you.
very different.
Thank you. Yeah.
So next year we are hoping that you will present
Something else.
something else, something unusual, something interesting, and something not traditional.
Okay.
Okay. So and thank you so much. We are going to the symphony,
Yes.
and
And we're leaving your apartment.
because we need.
I'll let you show us where the liquor cabinet is.
Oh,
And we'll be here when you get
you
back.
can be, but
Yeah.
exactly at 7.
Only the cat.
Well, thank you so much again. Thank you. So you were doing something with
I
this, right?
yes.
So don't forget this.
Thank you.